Moreover, the more successful the capitalist society is, the better. Industrial development, mechanical improvement, all of the great wonders of the modern age have done relatively little for the people at the very top of the income scale. Modern plumbing didn't mean a thing to the really wealthy people in ancient Rome. They had running water. It was carried in the hands of servants, but it was running. It didn't do them any good to be able to turn a tap. Television, radio that has brought what some people regard as entertainment to millions of others. The patricians in Roman society, they could get the best artists in their society to come into their homes for them. No, the great achievements and improvements of Western capitalism have redounded primarily to the benefit of the ordinary man on the street. They have primarily made available to the masses the luxuries that before that were available only to the classes. In 1848, John Stuart Mill, great English economist and philosopher, in a book called The Principles of Economics, wrote, and I quote, "Hitherto," he wrote, "it is questionable if all the mechanical inventions yet made has lightened the day's toil of any human being. They have enabled a greater population to live the same life of drudgery and imprisonment, and an increased number of manufacturers and others to make fortunes. They have increased the comforts of the middle classes, but they have not yet begun to effect those great changes in human destiny which it is in their nature and in their futurity to accomplish." Nobody could say that today. Had not lightened the day's toil of any human being. You will travel from one end to the other end of the prosperous countries like the United States, where capitalism has brought mechanical invention, and the only people you will find engaging in hard day's toil are those who are doing it for sport. If you want to find people really working hard, you have to go to the countries where capitalism has not yet come, to the backward countries. You have to go to places where people are still breaking the ground with a pick. They are still doing it. I go back to Thomas Jefferson, whom I started with. I once went through Monticello, his estate here near Charlottesville, and in going through Monticello, the guide tells you how many household servants he had. I took that figure, and I used it to estimate how much a person would have to spend today to be able to command the full-time services of as many people as Thomas Jefferson commanded for his consumption. I don't mean directly in having people around the house, but after all, if I buy a suit, somebody has worked to make that. That's the equivalent of so many days' services. And so I said, take the total amount of consumption divided by the average wages of a man, and that's the number of men that a man commands. Now, Thomas Jefferson was a well-to-do man, but he wasn't one of the most wealthy men of his times. He was upper middle class, lower upper class. There were many people like him. I no longer remember the exact number, but I remember that I calculated that for a person today to be able to command the services of as many people as he did, he would have to be able to spend on consumption something like $3 million a year. Now, the proportion of the American population that can do that is minuscule compared to the fraction of the people in Thomas Jefferson's day who were of his level of well-being. The fact is that there has been an enormous increase in equality in the United States, primarily as a result of free market capitalism. Of course, you will say to me, but what are you talking about? We haven't had free market capitalism. The government has been playing an increasing role in the last 50 years. All of these improvements you're talking about are attributable to the wise and beneficent intervention of the government in evening out the extremes of the income distribution. What about that? Well, I believe the situation is exactly the opposite, that government intervention has been a major source of inequality at both ends of the income scale. If I ask today, what are the major sources of poverty for the disadvantaged in this country? If you examine that question, you will find that the major sources, the major creator of poverty has been the U.S. government and local governments. If I take the class that is most noted, that we are likely to talk about, in what respect are the poor in the center ghettos of our big cities most disadvantaged? In what respect are the poor blacks worst off? There is no doubt what the answer is. The respect they are most disadvantaged is in the kind of schooling they can get. Why? Because the schools are run by the government. First of all, we give them a whammy in not letting them get decent training to have skills to work, and then we say, you don't have good skills, you aren't worth much in the marketplace. We want to make sure you are really not getting jobs, and so we will impose a minimum wage rate that will make sure that you're not worth anybody's while to hire. The minimum wage rate is the most anti-Negro law on the books of the United States, in my opinion, because it requires an employer to discriminate against anybody who has low skills. So our government schools give them low skills, and our government minimum wage laws deny them a job to get on-the-job training. Our government laws promote and defend the restrictive practices of trade unions, which have been another source of reduced opportunity to improve their lot on the part of low-income groups. We have a welfare system in the United States which has encouraged people to stay in the area of poverty, and to become poor and to stay poor. The alleged intentions are excellent, but the actual outcome is very different from the intentions. So on the one end, governmental programs, many enacted in the name of helping the poor, have in fact been a source of poverty for the disadvantaged. At the other end, a major source of great wealth has been special government privilege. You know, if you will pardon me for touching on high and mighty subjects, there was a president of the United States who was able to retire after the end of his term to a very high income level on the basis of a family fortune founded upon the possession of a number of TV licenses. There have been very few, it's not an accident that some of the great fortunes in this country in the past 30 or 40 years have been made either in the radio and television field or in the field of oil, because those are both areas in which the government has been granting special privilege, in the one case in the form of licenses for TV and radio stations given without charge, in the other case in the early days in the form of percentage depletion, of state pro-rationing boards, of oil import quotas, more recently in the form of entitlements, subsidies for the import of oil, and so on. If we look beyond the United States, if you go to the poorer countries of the world, to the underdeveloped countries, fortunes in those underdeveloped countries in the past decades have been primarily made through having import permits from the government privilege. So government intervention, in my opinion, has been a source of less equality, not of more. What's true of these specific measures may well be true of government redistribution via taxes. It may well be true of what we call, erroneously, our progressive income tax system. It's a system which has highly graduated rates, but which is full of special provisions so that people who are otherwise in the same position may pay vastly different taxes. It's a source of inequality and not of equality. In general, our government policies for redistribution via taxes bring back to mind the wonderful comment a century ago by William Graham Sumner in his essay on the Forgotten Man. Do you remember his comment about the society in which A and B get together to decide what C shall do for D? That's what happens here. A and B get together and decide what C, the taxpayer, the forgotten man in Sumner's account, shall do for D, the recipient. Except, somehow a little bit of that money seems to slip off on A and B on the way. Most government measures that have been enacted in the name of equality, in fact, end up benefiting people like you and me in the middle and upper income classes. We are the A's and B's who try to impose on the C's burdens to help the D's, but we get our share in the way. I believe along these lines that if one goes through the discussion of egalitarianism and equality of outcome, the conclusion you come to, or that I come to, is the importance of distinguishing between two very different things. One is for 90% of us to decide that we are willing to tax ourselves to help the unfortunate 10%, to relieve distress and assure that nobody is in misery. That's one thing. I think it's a wholly different thing for 80% of us to impose taxes on one 10% in the name of benefiting the other 10%. I think it's a wholly different thing for any majority of us to redistribute income between one group and another, not to relieve misery, not to finance necessary projects, but simply because, as many of the proponents of equality will say, they find inequality unlovely. The redistribution of income, the taking from some to give to others, in order to achieve some kind of an abstract concept of equality, is comparable to cutting down the high trees in a forest to the same level as a low tree so that no tree shall stand above any other. And it seems to me wholly unjustified. I do not believe it can be regarded as just or proper or right to use policemen to take resources from some in order to give to others, just because some of us may think that our values demand greater equality. My final conclusion: any society that puts equality ahead of freedom will end up with neither equality nor freedom. Any society that puts equality before freedom will end up with neither. On the other hand, a society that puts freedom first will, as a happy byproduct, end up both with greater freedom and greater equality. It will be a byproduct, but it will not be an accident. It will not be an accident because a free society releases the energies and the abilities of people to pursue their own objectives. It thus prevents some people from arbitrarily holding down other people. It thus prevents people from achieving positions of privilege and maintaining it permanently. So a society that puts freedom first will, by no accident, but as a happy byproduct, achieve, in my opinion, both greater freedom and greater equality. Thank you.